They laughed the moment I walked in. The sound was not loud, but sharp enough to slice through the silence of the courtroom. It echoed against the marble walls, bouncing off my memories like tiny knives. I remember the judge glancing up, annoyed. But the laughter stayed in my ears long after the room went quiet. I had spent 40 years mastering these floors, defending clients who once shook the nation. Now I stood here, alone, accused of the very crime I had warned others against. Fraud. They said I forged documents. They said my mind was slipping. They said I was too old to handle complex cases anymore. And the cruelest part, those words came from people I had trained myself. As the prosecutor adjusted his tie, I saw my reflection on the polished table. Wrinkles, tired eyes, but behind them, a fire that age could not smother. When you lose everything, something strange happens. Fear dies before you do. The first piece of evidence slid across the desk, my signature, copied perfectly. Except, I had never signed that page. I could have shouted. I could have begged. Instead, I smiled. Because in that forged line, I saw the hand of the real culprit, my own protégé, the one who had once called me a legend. Her name was Emily. Young, brilliant, ruthless in ways I never was. I had mentored her, believed in her, even handed her my biggest client when my health began to fail. She called me, sir, with such charm that I forgot ambition sometimes wears politeness as perfume. But ambition has no loyalty. When the laughter rose again, soft, polite, poisonous, I realized something. They were not laughing at the case. They were laughing at what age does to a person. They believed time had already buried me. They forgot that I helped build the coffin. The judge asked if I wanted to speak. My lawyer leaned forward, whispering that silence was wiser. But wisdom is useless when your dignity is on trial. I stood and faced them all, the jury, the smirking faces of my former colleagues, Emily sitting with the prosecution, pretending indifference. I will not defend my past, I said calmly. It speaks for itself. But I will expose every lie that crawled into this courtroom pretending to be truth. A murmur moved through the crowd. The judge tapped the gavel, but I could see something shift. Doubt. Doubt is more powerful than any witness. That night, I sat alone in my apartment. Old case files surrounded me like ghosts of battles won and lost. Every folder held memories of victories that once meant everything. Now, each file whispered the same question. How did it all go wrong? I poured myself a cup of cold coffee and began to trace back every detail. The contracts, the signatures, the transfers. And then I saw it, the pattern no one else had noticed. A missing stamp on one page, a mismatched date on another. Small errors invisible to younger eyes, but I had lived my life spotting them. Someone had framed me with precision. Someone who knew my habits, my shortcuts, my trust. Only one person fit that description. The next morning, I walked into my old firm unannounced. The receptionist froze. No one expected to see me again after the public humiliation. But I had come not to beg, to observe. I watched Emily giving orders from my old office. She wore confidence like armor. Her laughter filled the corridor, the same laughter from the courtroom. Every intern stared at her with the admiration I once earned. She caught sight of me and froze for a heartbeat, then smiled, as if seeing a ghost. Come to say goodbye? She asked. Not yet, I replied. I came to see how much dust settles when truth is buried. She laughed again. You should retire before you embarrass yourself further. I leaned closer. I already have been embarrassed. That part is over. Now it is your turn. Her smile faltered. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in her eyes. It was brief, but real, and that was enough to feed my will. As I walked out, a younger associate whispered, "He is finished." I turned back and said, "Do not mistake silence for defeat. I built this place on silence." When I reached home, I opened a locked drawer, one I had not touched in years. Inside lay an old recorder, a relic from the days before digital files ruled the courts. I had used it to keep private copies of every major meeting, a habit Emily always mocked as old-fashioned. I pressed play. The static hissed before voices emerged, clear, confident, and damning. Her voice, my client's voice, my own, too, in the background. But what caught my breath was the line she spoke at the end of that meeting months ago. Once he is gone, we can move everything through my channel. No one will notice. I replayed it, again and again, until the weight of betrayal settled like lead in my chest. The next day, I walked back into court, calm and ready. My lawyer whispered, "We have no new evidence." I whispered back, "We do now." The judge looked up as I requested permission to play a recording. Emily's eyes widened. The smirk vanished. The moment her voice filled the room, silence became heavier than any gavel strike. The laughter that had once mocked me, ended there. But that was not my victory. It was only the beginning of something much darker, something that would show them all that age is not weakness. Age is patience sharpened into a weapon. And this time, I was going to use it. The night after the recording played in court, the city felt different. The air outside the courthouse carried whispers of disbelief. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked through the crowd. Reporters called out my name, microphones pushed close to my face. I ignored them all. I had already said enough. The truth had begun to speak for itself. But truth is never enough on its own. Power still decides how loudly that truth is heard. When I reached home, I poured tea instead of coffee. My hands were steady now. Yet beneath that calm surface, something darker grew. Revenge was no longer a word, it had become a pulse in my veins. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Old lawyer shocks court with secret recording. Some called me a relic who refused to die quietly. Others called me a genius who had waited for the perfect strike. Both were wrong. I was neither. I was simply tired of being erased. At noon, I received a message from the managing partner of my old firm. The message was short: "We need to talk. Come in today." I went, not because I owed them anything, but because closure often comes disguised as confrontation. When I entered the boardroom, everyone stood except her, Emily. She sat confidently at the head of the table, my old seat. She greeted me with a smile that was far too calm for someone whose voice had just been played in court. "Congratulations," she said. "That was quite the performance yesterday." "Performance?" I repeated slowly. "Do not be offended," she continued. "You always had a talent for drama. But you and I both know one recording cannot save you. The case is still open. And I have friends in higher places." I looked around the table. The faces were familiar, but the loyalty was gone. They had chosen survival over integrity. I did not blame them. Fear is a better motivator than respect. "You stole from the company," I said evenly. "You forged my signature. You set me up. But you forgot one thing." Her eyebrow lifted. "And what is that?" "I taught you everything you know," I said, "but not everything I know." The silence that followed was delicious. I could almost hear her heartbeat falter. She dismissed me with a wave of her hand. "You are done, old man. You have no power left." That word, old, struck harder than any insult. It was not about years. It was about relevance. About being forgotten while still alive. I turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind me. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. My lawyer sounded uneasy. "They are filing a counterclaim," he said. "They are accusing you of blackmail. They say you used that recording illegally." I closed my eyes. I should have expected that. In law, the truth is never enough. You must also survive the backlash that follows it. Days turned into weeks. The case expanded. The media twisted every headline. I watched my reputation crumble piece by piece. Friends stopped calling. Former clients avoided me. Even the neighbors began whispering as I passed. It was not just a fall from grace. It was a burial. One evening, while reviewing old files, I came across a letter from my late wife. She had written it years ago during a time when I almost quit law. The paper had yellowed, but her words cut through time. "If the world takes everything from you, let it. What matters is what you refuse to give up, your integrity." I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside my desk lamp. That single paragraph became my anchor. The next day, I called a retired judge who owed me a favor. His name was Harold. He had once been my fiercest rival before age softened us both into reluctant friends. "I need a special motion approved," I said. "Something that can expose internal firm communications without alerting them." "That will not be easy," Harold said. "You will need a subpoena based on new evidence." "I have something better," I replied. "I have a confession." Harold went silent. "Whose confession?" I hesitated before answering. "Mine." He met me that evening in his private office. I placed before him a sealed envelope. Inside was a statement admitting partial fault, not for fraud, but for negligence. It was a calculated risk, a confession that opened legal access to their internal investigation files. "You are walking a dangerous line," Harold warned. "I know," I said, "but the truth hides behind walls built from fear. I need a way in." By the end of that week, my motion was accepted. My opponents celebrated too early, thinking my confession proved weakness. They did not see the door it unlocked. Through court discovery, I gained access to archived emails. Thousands of them. Long nights followed, reading line by line, date by date. It was during one of those nights that I found it, an email chain between Emily and a man named Richard, the firm's financial director. The subject line was simple: "Move the funds before he checks." I leaned back in my chair. My tea had gone cold again. It was all there, the offshore transfers, the secret accounts, the digital trails leading straight to them. She had not only betrayed me, she had stolen millions from the firm. For a moment, I felt satisfaction. Then something deeper, pity. She had built her empire on lies, believing herself untouchable. That arrogance would soon be her undoing. The next hearing came fast. The courtroom was packed again. She looked composed, confident, but I saw the faint tremor in her fingers when she noticed the folder in my hands. I began slowly, reading from the printed emails. Each line dropped like a hammer. Her face shifted from defiance to disbelief, then to pale silence. The judge leaned forward, eyebrows raised. "Are these verified documents?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Verified by the firm's own server logs." Emily's lawyer tried to object, claiming breach of confidentiality, but the judge overruled it. The recording had wounded her. The emails buried her. After the session ended, I walked out quietly. The reporters were louder this time. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. "How did you get those files? Was it revenge? Do you plan to sue the firm?" I said nothing. Some truths do not need an audience. That night, I sat by the window watching the city lights shimmer. I thought victory would feel like peace. Instead, it felt like exhaustion. Years of loyalty, decades of work, and it had all come down to this war of paper and pride. But the fight was far from over. I could sense the storm gathering. People like Emily do not surrender, they retaliate. And she did. 2 days later, I received a letter marked urgent. Inside was a formal notice. My assets were frozen pending investigation. She had filed a complaint accusing me of stealing client data. I laughed quietly, not because it was funny, but because it confirmed what I already knew. She was desperate. Desperation is a confession in disguise. I picked up my phone, called my lawyer, and said, "Let her play. She just made her biggest mistake." Outside, thunder rolled through the night sky. It matched the rhythm of my heart. I was no longer defending myself. I was hunting. The fall they planned for me was complete. But they did not realize, the fall is where I found solid ground again. And from there, I would rise in a way none of them were prepared for. The morning after my assets were frozen, I sat in silence at the kitchen table. The same cup of tea had gone cold 3 times. I had faced countless adversaries in my career, but this attack was different. It was not about money anymore. It was about erasing me completely, my name, my legacy, my dignity. Outside, the world carried on. Cars moved, people hurried, and sunlight poured through the window as if mocking my stillness. But deep down, I knew something was shifting. Every betrayal leaves behind a shadow, and shadows always point to their source. I began the day with the same precision that had once made me feared in court. I listed every document Emily could possibly use against me. Every file, every client note, every recording. Then I started tracing the leak, the path of information she used to file her new complaint. It did not take long to see the pattern. A week before the first trial, I had shared case updates with a junior associate named Aaron. Young, sharp, eager to impress Emily. He had always asked too many questions, but I dismissed it as enthusiasm. I realized now that he had been her eyes inside my camp. I called him that afternoon. His voice trembled when he answered. "You know why I am calling," I said. There was silence. Then a soft, broken reply. "She promised she would make me partner if I helped her." "She will not," I said quietly. "She will use you and leave you exactly where you are, beneath her." He began to cry. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "I have proof," he whispered. "Emails, messages. She made me forward everything from your account." That sentence was the spark I needed. Within hours, I met Aaron in a cafe far from downtown. He arrived wearing guilt like a heavy coat. His hands shook as he handed me a flash drive. "This has everything," he said. "Please, I just want this to be over." I looked him in the eyes. Nothing is ever over until the truth comes out. That night, I examined the contents of the drive. It was worse than I expected. Internal memos altered, client agreements rewritten, payment trails rerouted. Emily had built an empire of deceit brick by brick, each one polished with arrogance. At midnight, I called Harold again. "I have new evidence," I said. He sighed. "Do you ever sleep?" "Sleep is for those who feel safe," I replied. We met the next morning in his chambers. When he saw the documents, he leaned back in disbelief. "If this is authentic, she is finished." "It is authentic," I said. Aaron confirmed every detail. Harold rubbed his forehead. "Then prepare yourself. She will strike harder now. She will not go down quietly." He was right. 2 days later, I received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was calm, confident, and disturbingly familiar. "Stop digging," she said. "Emily," I replied, my tone steady. "You are too old to play this game," she continued. "Let it go before you destroy what little you have left." "You already destroyed that," I said. "Now I have nothing left to lose." "Then you have my pity," she whispered, and the line went dead. I sat in silence, replaying her words. Pity. The word stung. She believed pity was power. She would soon learn it was poison. The next hearing was scheduled for Monday. I spent the weekend preparing with surgical focus. Every statement, every exhibit, every timeline. By Sunday night, I had memorized every document line by line. Age may slow the body, but it sharpens the mind when sharpened by rage. When the day came, the courtroom buzzed with tension. The same reporters filled the benches. Emily sat across from me, her expression cold, confident, untouched by fear. She thought she had buried me again with her new accusations. The judge entered. The bailiff called for order. The trial resumed. Emily's lawyer began his attack immediately, painting me as a manipulative relic who could not accept the end of his career. He spoke of greed, vanity, and desperation. Every word was meant to provoke me. I remained still. Then came my turn. I stood, holding the folder that Aaron had given me. "Your Honor," I began, "they say I am desperate. Perhaps I am. Desperate not for wealth, but for truth." I placed the flash drive on the evidence table. "This contains communication between the opposing counsel and my former associate. It reveals deliberate fabrication of evidence and intentional obstruction of justice." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you have proof of authenticity?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said, and nodded to Harold, who stepped forward as my witness. As the contents played on the screen, the courtroom grew eerily silent. Emily's voice filled the room once more, instructing Aaron to alter files, to mislabel transactions, to leak privileged data. Her composure cracked for the first time. Her lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him. "This court will not tolerate deceit," he said sharply. When the playback ended, Emily stood. "This is manipulation," she argued, her tone trembling. "He is framing me." I met her eyes and spoke quietly. "I taught you how to lie on paper, but I never taught you how to lie with your eyes." The judge looked between us, then announced that the court would adjourn for a special review of the evidence. As I stepped outside, cameras flashed again. The reporters shouted questions, but my attention was drawn to one person standing near the steps, Aaron. He avoided my gaze, guilt written across his face. I walked up to him. "You did the right thing," I said. He shook his head. "No, I did it too late." "Late truth is still truth," I replied. That evening, I went home and sat beside the window. The city lights reflected on the glass, creating two versions of myself, one weary, one determined. The reflection felt like a metaphor for my life, the man I was and the one I had become. The phone rang again. It was Harold. "The review is complete," he said. "They confirmed everything. The judge is furious. He is ordering a full audit of the firm's finances." For a moment, I could not speak. Years of betrayal had finally begun to unravel. "Harold," I said softly, "thank you." He sighed. "Do not thank me yet. This will destroy her, but it will also drag you through the fire." "Then let it burn," I replied. That night, as I stared into the darkness, I thought about every person who had laughed at me, every colleague who called me obsolete, every client who turned away. They believe the past fades quietly, but the past never fades. It waits. The storm I had unleashed was only beginning. Emily would fight back with everything she had. She still held power, money, and allies who feared her more than the law. But fear is temporary. Evidence is permanent. And as I closed my eyes, I realized something deeper. The greatest betrayals do not come from enemies. They come from those who once promised loyalty. The shadows around me no longer frightened me. They guided me, because in those shadows, I had finally found the path to justice. The laughter that started my downfall would soon echo again. But this time, it would not be laughter at me. It would be laughter from me. The week that followed felt endless. Every hour brought another headline, another twist. The firm's name filled the news feeds across the city. They called it the betrayal case. I did not like the title, but I understood why it caught attention. Power, money, and scandal always do. Emily's silence became louder than her words. She had gone underground, avoiding cameras, skipping interviews. That was not fear. That was strategy. I knew her too well. She was preparing her counterstrike. I could not rest. My apartment looked like an evidence vault. Stacks of files covered the table. Laptops, flash drives, handwritten notes, and photographs formed a maze of truth waiting to be connected. Every page carried a clue. Every missing line, every misprinted date was a sign. For years I had built cases for others. This time, I was building one for myself. The audit ordered by the judge began immediately. 2 financial examiners arrived at the firm's headquarters with sealed warrants. The firm's staff watched in confusion as computers were seized and accounts locked. The media captured everything. I watched the footage alone, the glow of the television flickering across my face. My phone rang. It was Harold again. "She is cornered," he said. "The examiners found transactions leading to shell companies in her name. She will deny everything," I replied. Of course she will. But denial loses power once numbers begin to speak. I hung up and stared at the screen. Emily appeared briefly in the footage, escorted out by security. Her expression was unreadable. Pride wrapped in fear. Later that evening, I received an anonymous message. No name, no signature. Only one line. You do not know the whole story. Attached was a single image. A scanned page from a confidential document stamped Government Contract 2016. My eyes narrowed. I had never seen that file before. I enlarged it. Emily's signature appeared at the bottom, but the approval stamp belonged to a federal inspector I knew personally, a man named Graham who had retired years ago. Something was wrong. The next morning, I visited Graham at his home on the outskirts of the city. He lived quietly, surrounded by dusty shelves and forgotten commendations. When he saw me at his door, his surprise turned into unease. I was wondering when someone would come, he said. Someone already has, I replied, showing him the image. He adjusted his glasses, studying it carefully. That is my stamp. But I never approved that document. Then who did? I asked. He looked at me with heavy eyes. Emily was part of a private consultancy that handled legal clearances for that contract. I warned her that the deal was illegal. She told me it was already done. The room fell silent. Dust floated in the sunlight like ghosts of old lies. Graham, I said quietly, if that document surfaces, it changes everything. He sighed. It already has. People higher than her were involved. She was only the tool. For the first time, I felt something colder than betrayal, the realization that my war might be against something far larger than Emily. When I returned home, I printed every record I had on that contract. The same shell companies appeared again. They were not just hiding stolen funds from the firm, they were laundering money from government projects. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I called a journalist I trusted, a woman named Sarah who had covered corruption cases for years. Sarah, I said, how much truth are you willing to risk your career for? She laughed softly. As much as it takes to wake people up. I sent her copies of the files under an alias. I did not want fame. I wanted exposure. 2 days later, the first article went live. Corporate scandal tied to government fraud. The story spread like wildfire. My name was not mentioned, but everyone in the legal community knew who had lit the match. By evening, my phone rang again. This time, it was not Harold. It was Emily. Her voice trembled, but her arrogance still bled through. You have no idea what you have done, she said. I do, I replied. You should have stopped when you still could. They will destroy you, she warned. They already tried, I said calmly. It did not work. She hung up. I sat in silence, listening to the ticking clock. Every tick sounded like footsteps approaching a finish line I had not chosen. The next day, 2 men in plain suits visited me. They claimed to be federal auditors. Their questions were sharp, their tone polite but distant. They wanted copies of every file I had. I handed them everything. I had nothing left to hide. After they left, Harold called. You are in dangerous territory now, he said. I know, I answered, but the truth does not fear danger. That night, I could not sleep. I walked to the balcony and looked at the skyline. The city glowed beneath a stormy sky. I thought about the years I had given to the system, the justice I believed in, the students I mentored, the cases I won. I had spent my life defending the law, and now the law itself was the weapon used against me. The next morning, I received a summons. A new case had been filed. The government was investigating not only the firm but me as well, for allegedly releasing classified information. I laughed bitterly. Justice had become a circle. Each truth uncovered birthed another accusation. Later that day, Sarah called. They are trying to silence the story, she said. Pressure is coming from the top. I need confirmation before I go public with more. Do it, I said firmly. If I fall, let me fall loudly. The following week, the second exposé appeared. It named senior officials, board members, and Emily herself as participants in a cover-up that spanned years. The reaction was explosive. Arrests began. The firm's building was sealed. Yet even as victory seemed near, unease lingered in my chest. I knew Emily too well. She would not go down without one final move. 3 nights later, my fears were proven right. I returned home to find my apartment door slightly open. The air inside was heavy, still. I stepped in slowly, every sense awake. Nothing was stolen, but every file was gone. The walls felt violated. I called Harold. They have taken everything, I said. He exhaled heavily. Then they are desperate. That means you are close. Closer than ever, I replied. The next day, Sarah called again. Her voice shook. They are following me. Be careful. I will, I said. We are almost there. When I hung up, I sat quietly for a long time. My hands rested on the empty desk where the evidence once lay. I felt no fear, only resolve. I had started this fight to clear my name. Now it had become something else, a war to prove that age is not weakness, that experience is not irrelevance, that truth does not retire. They thought they could bury me under my own history. They forgot that history remembers those who refuse to vanish quietly. I looked out the window at the fading light and whispered to myself, this is not the end. This is the reckoning. The day after my apartment was emptied, I stood in front of the courthouse steps before the doors opened. The stone was cold under my palm. I had lost every physical page, yet the case still lived in my head. Dates, amounts, names, routes of money. The map was carved into me. They could steal paper, but not memory. I filed the motion at 9 on the dot. The clerk glanced at the title and looked up as if the words held weight. Emergency petition for injunctive relief. Petition for protective order. Motion to compel forensic imaging of every device inside the firm and the affiliated shell companies. The judge assigned was strict, old school, allergic to theatrics. That was good for me. I did not need grand speeches. I needed rules and a clock. Emily arrived minutes later with 2 new lawyers. Their shoes were too shiny and their smiles too quick. She walked past me without a word. For a moment her shoulder brushed mine. I felt a tremor through fabric. Not fear, calculation. Inside, the hearing moved fast. I laid out the theft of my files, the prior pattern of tampering, the government contract trail that had cracked open the audit, the anonymous threats, the strange visit from men who called themselves auditors. I gave times, call logs, building entry footage from my hallway camera, the serial number of the flash drive Aaron had handed me. I spoke like a metronome. No anger, no flourish, only facts that fit together like teeth on a key. Her side moved to dismiss. They called me unstable. They said the missing evidence was a stunt to drag the case. They accused me of feeding stories to the press. Every word aimed at my age. Every phrase built to paint me as a lonely fighter swinging at shadows. The judge asked one question. Counsel, if the missing files do not exist, why object to a neutral forensic image of your systems? Silence sat down beside them. I watched their eyes move, not outward but inward, toward whatever they feared a hard drive might confess. The order came down within the hour. A neutral team would image the servers and personal devices of specific custodians, including Emily and the financial director. Chain of custody would be strict. Any interference would trigger contempt. As we filed out, Emily finally spoke to me. You think you won something today, she said. You forced my hand. I watched you force your own, I answered. That afternoon, I walked to a small storage facility on the southern edge of the city. The manager was a quiet woman with careful hands. I had rented a unit there years ago when the firm expanded. Inside that unit lay a backup I had nearly forgotten. Microcassette recordings from meetings before the world drowned in cloud drives. I slid open a metal drawer and stared at the neat rows of tapes. A generation dismissed these as junk. I saw a vault. I picked out 3 labeled with the client name tied to the 2016 contract. At home, I found my old player, cleaned the heads with a cotton swab, and pressed play. The hiss came first, then voices. The date stamp clicked. Emily, younger, eager, relentless. The client, greedy and careful. My own voice warning them both. The final lines froze the air in my living room. If anyone ever checks the clearance chain, routed under the inspection code from Graham's retired Q, Emily said, it will pass as a legacy entry. No one checks legacy. I stopped the tape and rewound the last 10 seconds. Then I recorded that segment cleanly into a digital file with the date visible on the player's tiny screen. I made 3 copies, each on a separate encrypted drive. One went into a sealed envelope marked for Harold. One went to Sarah through a courier. One stayed under the floorboard where the heating vent used to be. The next morning, the forensic team entered the firm with the court order. I watched from across the street as employees lined the hallway with the baffled look of people who sense a ship tipping. An hour later, my phone buzzed. A number I did not recognize. The voice on the line was low and steady. You are not the only target, the caller said. Your journalist friend is on a list. Watch her. Who are you? A mistake they made years ago. I am fixing it. The line died. I called Sarah at once. No answer. I sent a message in our agreed code. No reply. I put on my coat and left. The rain began as a whisper and turned into needles. By the time I reached the street outside the station where she often met sources, my clothes were heavy. I scanned the crowd. She appeared from the stairwell, hood up, eyes alert. I moved toward her just as a black car eased from the curb. The back window rolled down an inch. A camera clicked. She looked at me and shook her head. Walk, she said. Please do not stop. We moved with strangers, 2 figures among many. She did not look at me again. They followed me last night, she said. They want my source. I told them there is no single source. I told them the story writes itself if you look straight at it. They will try harder, I said. They already did. They sent me a file that claims you paid for the recording. I felt a calm I did not expect. Then they just admitted they saw it. We separated at the corner. As I turned away, she called out softly without raising her head. Do not stop now. Back in court, the forensic team delivered the first report under seal. The judge read for a long time. When he looked up, the room felt smaller. There are deletions, he said, some within the last 48 hours. The deletions match the time window of the theft reported at the petitioner's residence. The log files indicate remote wiping from a personal device assigned to Ms. Emily. Her lawyer stood. There must be an error in the tool. The judge stared at him. The error is not in the tool. He set a hearing for sanctions. He also set a schedule for an expedited bench trial on my original claims. Pressure now had a date. That night, I could not sit. I walked the length of my apartment, then I walked the length of my hallway, then the length of the block. Somewhere between the second and third pass I understood why my hands were steady. I was no longer simply trying to clear my name. I was building the case I would have built for any client who had been stripped of dignity. The client happened to be me. The morning of the sanctions hearing, the courtroom lights felt too bright. The clerk swore in the lead examiner. He described a pattern of deletions, the path of a remote access connection, the recovery of fragments that no one had expected to see again. He spoke about a folder with a plain name that contained a ledger of transfers in and out of the shells. He explained the odd entry that repeated across months. Legacy clearance variance, it read. The phrase I had heard on the tape. I stood for cross and asked only 3 questions. Is the user who triggered the remote wipe the same user who accessed the folder labeled with the variance phrase? Yes. Is that user tied to a device registered to Ms. Emily? Yes. Is the clock on the wipe less than 2 hours after the court granted the imaging order? Yes. The judge did not need a speech from me. He did not want one. He asked Emily to rise. He warned her about perjury. He gave her a narrow path to tell the truth. She walked past it without looking. She blamed an assistant. She blamed a vendor. She blamed a phantom update. Contempt is not a shout. It is a sentence that lands without decoration. The judge fined her daily until full compliance and referred the destruction to the district attorney. The room exhaled. People forget that justice makes a sound. It is the sound of air returning to a space that lies had been filling. After the hearing, I found Aaron waiting by the elevator. He could not meet my eyes. They came to my apartment, he said. They searched everything. They told my landlord I was involved in fraud. Move out, I said. Leave a note on your door with a time that you will return for your boxes. Do not go at that time. Go 2 hours later. Bring a friend with a camera. He looked confused, then nodded. You will be fine, I added. But you must stop trying to be liked by people who will burn your future to warm their hands for one night. That evening, I drafted a civil complaint against the firm itself, not just Emily. Breach of fiduciary duty, malicious prosecution, retaliation. I did not write it like a weapon. I wrote it like a mirror. Every paragraph reflected a choice they had made when they laughed at me on the first day and every day after. I filed at dawn. By noon, the story broke that the district attorney had opened a criminal inquiry. A reporter shouted through a crowded hall that arrests were expected. I did not celebrate. I checked the lock on my door and brewed tea. I set the microcassette player on my desk like an old friend. At sunset, my phone rang. An unknown voice again. The same low tone, steady, careful. You should come to the courthouse loading dock, the caller said. Now, I went at once. The sky had the color of bruised metal. The dock light flickered. A plain cardboard box sat on the concrete beside the dumpster. No one stood near it. I lifted the lid. Inside lay printouts, not originals, but enough to map the rest. Payment authorizations with names that had never appeared in our filings, emails between a board member and a federal aide, a memo that used the phrase legacy clearance as if it were a magic word that could bleach a record. There was also a photograph. Emily seated at a small table with the board member. The date stamp placed them together the same night my files vanished. Footsteps echoed behind me. I turned. A shadow paused at the corner of the ramp, then vanished into rain. I closed the box and held it like a newborn case. I knew what this meant. The circle was wider than I had seen, but it had a seam. Someone on the inside wanted out. The wheel that had rolled over me for months had begun to grind the people who built it. On the walk home, I felt a strange calm. Not triumph, not relief. A heavier feeling, like standing on a bridge that you repaired with your own hands while traffic begins to cross. You listen to each plank and trust the joinery even as it groans. My door clicked behind me. I placed the box on the table, dried my hands, and called Harold. I did not tell him everything. I told him enough to set a special setting for the morning. He agreed without questions. I sat in the dark and waited for dawn. I thought about the first laugh I heard when this began. I thought about the last one I would allow. The city quieted. The rain softened. Somewhere below, a delivery truck hissed to a stop. The world kept moving because it does not know how to do anything else. The phone lit the room once more. A new message, no name. 5 words only. Check the back of photo. I lifted the picture and turned it over. A handwritten note curved along the edge in a hand I recognized from a decade ago. She was not the first. The handwriting on that photo burned itself into my mind. She was not the first. I read it again under the desk lamp, tracing each letter until the ink bled into memory. Someone had slipped that message into my life with purpose. Whoever they were, they knew the circle was older than Emily, older than my betrayal. I did not sleep that night. I sat with the photograph until the sun started to creep through the curtains. Every case I had ever handled passed through my thoughts. Each client, each partner. I began to see patterns I had ignored, contracts pushed through too quickly, approvals signed by people who no longer worked at the firm, missing archives that no one questioned. If Emily was not the first, then who was? By noon, I met Harold in his office. He looked exhausted. The courtroom wars had aged him faster than the years. "Harold," I said, handing him the photo, "look at the note." He read it once, then again. "Someone wants you to dig deeper." "Someone inside the network," I replied. "Someone who knows how far this goes." He rubbed his temples. "Do you realize what you are suggesting? That the fraud is systemic? That she was part of an inherited operation?" "I am not suggesting," I said. "I am remembering." I left his office and headed straight for the courthouse records room. The clerk knew me well enough not to ask questions. For hours, I searched through sealed case files from the firm's previous clients. One case caught my attention. A settlement from 15 years ago involving a construction conglomerate accused of bribery. My firm had represented them. The lead attorney had been a man named Victor Hale. He had died suddenly a year after the case ended. Heart failure, they said. I remembered Victor. Sharp mind, steady voice, a mentor to many, including Emily. The file's correspondence log showed something strange. Victor had used the same signature pattern Emily later adopted, same phrasing, same format, same code references on billing entries. It was not imitation. It was training. She had inherited his methods, and his secrets. I copied the file reference number and left. The hallway outside buzzed with the echo of typewriters and footsteps. Every sound carried a sense of forewarning. That evening, I called Sarah. Her voice was tense. "They are trying to shut the story down," she said. An injunction order arrived at my office claiming defamation and breach of national security. National security, I repeated. Yes, that contract from 2016 was not the first. The same clearance pattern was used for multiple government deals. Someone powerful is terrified. Then keep every note backed up. Off-site, offline. I already did, she said. But you need to be careful. They are not playing by legal rules anymore. At midnight, I sat again at my desk, the city quiet beyond the window. The box from the loading dock was still there. I began sorting its contents. Each page told a story of corruption that stretched back decades. The same language, the same accounting tricks, the same lawyer's initials on early documents. VH Victor Hale. He had built the blueprint that Emily later perfected. And if the note was right, there had been someone before him. I turned over another photograph from the box. Victor with a man in uniform. The name badge read Colonel Avery, a procurement officer for defense contracts. He had vanished years ago after an audit scandal. The circle widened again. At dawn, I took the evidence to Harold. "We are not fighting one person," I said. "We are fighting a lineage." He stared at the photograph. "If this is true, it explains why they keep moving faster than we expect. Every generation trains the next." "Then we cut the chain," I said. "We end it where it stands." The next hearing was a turning point. Emily arrived pale, sleepless, her confidence fractured. The district attorney had opened a formal investigation based on the recovered data. Her lawyers whispered frantically, but she sat silent, eyes locked on me. When her name was called, she rose slowly. "I have something to say," she began. Her voice shook. "I was not the one who started this." The courtroom murmured. She looked directly at me. "You knew Victor. You knew what he taught. He told us this system was unbreakable." The judge warned her to stay on topic. She ignored him. "You think I framed you? I only did what he told all of us to do. Protect the machine." Her words hung in the air. I realized she had just admitted to everything and nothing at the same time. She was surrendering one truth to hide another. When the session ended, I approached her in the hallway. "Why now?" I asked. "Because they will come for both of us," she said softly. "You exposed the cracks. They will not forgive that." "Who are they?" She hesitated. eyes darting to the security cameras. You will know soon enough. Then she walked away, swallowed by the crowd. 2 hours later, my phone vibrated. A new message. You are in over your head. Leave the city. No name, no number traceable. Just a warning that arrived too late. That evening, I returned home to find my apartment once again disturbed. This time nothing was stolen, but something had been added, a single envelope on the desk. Inside was a cassette tape, newer than the ones I had stored. On the label, Hale Archive 7. I played it. Victor's voice filled the room. Calm, deliberate, chillingly precise. If this tape is found, it means someone has tried to clean the trail. The legacy clearance system is not a trick of paperwork. It is the backbone of an entire network. The day anyone challenges it, the machine will eat its own. Remember that when you decide to play hero. The recording ended with static. I sat in darkness long after the tape clicked to silence. Everything I had done, the courtroom battles, the evidence hunts, the public exposure, had only stirred something deeper. Emily was not the architect. She was the apprentice. The architects were ghosts wearing the faces of institutions. I looked again at the photo that started it all, the one with the note. She was not the first. I turned it in my hand and felt a second layer of paper under the glossy surface. Carefully, I peeled it back. Another line appeared beneath the first, faint but readable. Meet me where the case began. The courthouse. I stood, grabbed my coat, and stepped into the night. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shining like mirrors. Each reflection of a passing car felt like an eye watching. As I approached the courthouse gates, a figure stood under the old oak near the stairs. A man in a gray coat, hat low, face hidden by shadow. You got my note, he said. Who are you? He handed me a sealed folder. Someone who once believed in Victor Hale. What is this? Proof that he was never working alone. Before I could ask more, headlights swept across the square. The man turned and disappeared between parked cars. I looked down at the folder in my hands. It was heavy. Inside, I could feel the weight of pages thick with names. I did not open it there. Some truths are too loud for the open air. I walked home through the sleeping city, the folder pressed against my chest like a heartbeat. When I reached my door, I realized my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from anticipation. For the first time, I understood the full scale of what I was facing. This was no longer about clearing my name. This was about rewriting a history that had been built on manipulation, lies, and buried power. I placed the folder on the desk beside the photo, the tapes, and the empty teacup. Then I whispered into the stillness, you laughed at me for being old. You will not laugh when I show them what time remembers. Outside, thunder rolled again, low, distant, inevitable. The folder felt heavier than paper. I slit the seal with a fingernail and spread the contents across my desk. Memos, emails, payment authorizations, and one sheet that made my pulse jump. A scan of the very document that had been used to condemn me on day one. The contract with my signature. The stone they had tied to my neck. I studied it the way a surgeon studies a scar. Not the words, but the marks between them. The page held a faint yellow pattern, almost like freckles, scattered in a grid. I had seen that pattern before during a counterfeiting case years ago. Printer microdots. A hidden calendar. A trail most people never learn to read. I fetched a small loop from a drawer and leaned over the page. Dots formed a coded timestamp and a device number. The document that supposedly came from my home office had been printed on a machine assigned to the firm's secure floor, the floor that housed the accounting team and the managing partner's suite. The date embedded in those dots placed the printout 2 weeks after they accused me of forging it. I photographed the pattern and cataloged the code. Then I reached for something older. A medical file. Years ago I had fractured my wrist on a staircase. The injury had changed the way my hand moved forever. My signature used to bend on the final stroke. After the fall, it cut straight and short. Any lawyer who had worked with me for more than a month knew it. The supposed signature on that contract curved with the old bend. It did not match the hand I had lived with since the fracture. I printed the medical note, blew up my signatures across 10 years, and marked the fracture date in red. I breathed out slowly. The stone they tied to my neck had just grown a handle. Court began at 9. The room was full again. The district attorney sat in the first row now, eyes narrowed, pen steady. The judge called the case and fixed us with a look that asked for no theater. I stood with a single folder and no speech. I ask leave to recall Exhibit A, I said. The clerk placed the document on the projector. The contract filled the screen, my name at the bottom like a bruise. I did not look at the jurors. I looked at the page the way a locksmith looks at a lock he designed. I will call 2 short witnesses, I said. An imaging examiner and a physician. The examiner took the stand first. He explained the microdot system used by certain laser printers. He pointed to the pixel lattice hiding in the white spaces. He read the time, the date, the device. He tied the device tag to the firm's equipment list retrieved by court order. He stated that the sheet had not been printed from any machine registered to my home. Could these dots be faked? Opposing counsel asked. Yes, the examiner replied, by replacing the entire toner drum with a counterfeit that produces a perfectly measured hoax pattern, then accessing the exact make and model in use, and matching the serial coding schema for that batch year. That requires knowledge that is tightly held by the manufacturer and law enforcement. I have never seen it done. The judge stared over his glasses. The room did not move. Then my physician took the stand. He described my wrist injury, the nerve irritation, the therapy. He drew a simple line on a chart, the curve before the fall, the clipped stop after. He pointed to the contract signature. The curve was right there, careless and smooth, the hand I lost the year I fell. Opposing counsel tried to suggest stress could restore old habits. The doctor shook his head. This is not mood. This is anatomy. I rested my hand on the table. In that moment I felt age not as a weight but as proof. Time had left marks on me that could not be copied. That realization hit me harder than the gavel ever had. I moved to the next part without letting relief spill into my voice. One final point, Your Honor. Section 14.7 of this contract is boilerplate I drafted years ago. It requires that any party who relies on this document to assert a claim must place the original wet ink pages into a neutral escrow within 10 days. The clause was meant to block quiet substitutions after signing. No one ever notices it, because it hides beneath a dull title. I tapped that line on the screen. The judge leaned closer. Opposing counsel flipped pages with a sudden urgency that made paper sound like rain. I hereby request enforcement, I said. They have held this contract over me for months. They rely on it still. If they cannot produce the original pages in escrow by 10 days after their first filing, the clause requires the court to treat any reliance as presumptively fraudulent until proven otherwise. Opposing counsel called it a trick. He said the clause was buried. The judge read the sentence slowly, then read it again. The clock began to tick in the quiet. 10 days had passed months ago. The judge lowered his voice. Counsel, did your client lodge the original in escrow as required? A long pause. A throat cleared. A hedge formed, then died. No, Your Honor. The order landed like a hammer. Reliance presumptively fraudulent. The very paper they lifted against me became a blade that turned in their hands. I heard the reporters shift in their seats. I did not turn my head. I watched Emily instead. She sat with her hands clasped too tightly, knuckles white, eyes on me as if the room had narrowed to the width between us. I saw in her face a cycle I knew too well: defiance, reason, fear. The judge set an evidentiary day to determine sanctions related to the contract. He turned to the district attorney and asked whether the state wished to be heard regarding potential tampering of filings. The district attorney rose without haste and said only, yes. The word stayed in the air like smoke. Recess came. The hallway felt colder than usual. Emily approached with her lawyers hanging back by the water cooler. She kept her voice low. Where did you learn the microdot code? She asked, and why did you hide that clause for so long? I did not hide it, I replied. You never read past what you could weaponize. Her mouth twitched. It will not matter. The board will cut me loose, and they will throw you under the next bus that passes. Then step off the road, I said. She shook her head. There is no step left. Back inside, I called one more witness. Not a technician, not a doctor. Aaron. He walked to the stand with a face that looked older than last week. He admitted forwarding my files under pressure. He admitted being told to pull pages from older contracts and stitch language into new ones. He said they called it housekeeping. He said he had wanted a title that would make his parents proud. Opposing counsel tried to dismantle him. He kept his answers short. When asked why he was testifying against his own firm, he said, because I looked at the person I was becoming and I could not keep his name. It was not legal analysis. It was something else, something that struck the room in a way code never could. I introduced one final piece, the microcassette of Emily's training session years earlier, where she had explained the legacy clearance variance trick with a confidence that bordered on boredom. The court had heard her voice before, but this segment carried a different chill. It showed routine. It showed a life lived inside the lie, not a single lapse. The judge did not hide his reaction. He called counsel to the bench. Words passed under white noise. When they returned, he set new parameters for the forensic team. He granted fresh subpoenas. He warned that the case had crossed from private conflict to a matter of public harm. We broke again. I stepped outside and found the sky a hard blue over the stone. Sarah stood near the steps with her pad closed. She did not ask questions. She simply whispered, "They cannot spin microdots or bone scars. That is the end for their story." I wanted to believe that. I could not. The network that trained Emily had not shown its full face. When people fear prison, they cut bargains. When people fear losing the machine that feeds them, they break the table. I walked back in for one more motion. I requested protective custody for Aaron and a limited shield for Sarah's source list. The judge granted both with a weary nod. The system had finally started to defend the very witnesses it once ignored. As the afternoon settled, Emily stood without being called. "Your Honor," she said, "I wish to make a statement under oath." Her lawyers tried to pull her down. She stayed up. The judge allowed it. She spoke without polish. She named 2 board members who had built the clearance channel with Victor. She described meetings in rooms without windows, and a simple rule: no original ever leaves the inner circle. She confessed to using my old signature as a mask because it provided a shield of credibility with older clients. She said she had told herself that everyone wins when a contract moves faster. By the time she finished, the courtroom had forgotten to breathe. I felt no triumph, only a weight that had waited years to fall. I looked at her and saw the student she had been, and the engineer of rot she had become. I saw the gap between those two selves and understood that it had been paved by people who called themselves leaders. The judge recessed with a face that gave nothing away. The district attorney requested custody for certain individuals named in the statement. Bailiffs moved with practiced quiet. The hallways filled with murmurs that sounded like wine through a broken door. I walked alone to the end of the corridor. My hands rested on the cool marble rail. The city hummed below. I remembered the laughter on the first day. I remembered the taste of humiliation. Now the same document that had framed me had turned like a mirror and showed them their own faces. Age had not saved me. Evidence had. Yet the courage to look at the small things, to wait for the right hour, to pull at the thread until the entire cloth shifted, that came from time lived. That thought landed deeper than any victory. On my way out, a clerk hurried after me with a sealed envelope. No return. Inside, a single line typed on plain paper. "You are forcing them into daylight. Do not stop before sunset." I slipped the note into my pocket and stepped into the cold. My knees ached as I took the stairs. My heart felt strange, not as a drum of war but as a quiet engine. The weapon that once cut me had turned in the same hands that forged it. Every step I took after that felt like walking across a bridge that had stopped swaying. The courthouse had fallen silent after the last hearing, but the quiet outside did not follow me home. It lived inside my chest. Each breath came heavy, like my body had been carrying the weight of every lie spoken under oath. At night, the case replayed in fragments. The flicker of the projector, the sound of the gavel, Emily's trembling confession. Each scene returned sharper than it had been in the moment, as though my mind refused to let the story rest. I would wake drenched in sweat, heartbeat racing against the echo of my own name. The doctor called it exhaustion. He handed me pills and told me to rest. I nodded because it was easier than explaining that rest was the one thing I feared. When I closed my eyes, I saw signatures, dotted codes, faces of jurors frozen between disbelief and pity. The days blurred. Meals turned cold on the table. The tea kettle screamed itself empty. My hands shook when I reached for files, and sometimes I forgot what I had been searching for. Age had never frightened me before, but that month, it did. I felt time pressing its hand on my shoulder, whispering that my body was losing patience with my mind. The headlines changed tone. Reporters no longer mocked. They called me relentless. Some called me obsessed. I did not mind either word. Obsession was the price of truth, and truth had begun to cost me more than sleep. One morning I found blood on the sink after brushing my teeth. A small cut on the gum, harmless. Yet it startled me. I realized I had stopped looking after myself entirely. The mirror reflected someone unrecognizable, thinner, paler, eyes sunk deep as though they were searching inward for the part of me that still believed this fight had an end. I spent that day in silence, curtains drawn. The world outside kept spinning, sirens, street vendors, traffic horns, but inside there was only the hum of an overworked mind. I thought about the early years, when my wife was still alive. She used to tell me that truth, like iron, demanded forging. It required fire and patience, but if you stayed too long in the flame, even iron melted. That evening I went to her grave. I had not visited in months. The cemetery was quiet, the marble cool under my palm. I spoke softly, though I knew the wind would be my only witness. "I am close," I said, "closer than I ever thought possible, but I do not know what will be left of me when it ends." The wind did not answer, but a single leaf brushed my hand. I took that as enough. When I returned home, I found a letter slipped under the door. No signature. Only 2 lines. "You are not alone. They are afraid. Keep going." I folded it carefully and placed it inside my old case file. Someone somewhere still believed in what I was doing. That reminder steadied me. The next week brought more hearings, more statements, more nights spent hunched over transcripts until dawn. I began to notice how my body protested, the ache in my back, the tremor in my fingers when I held a pen too long. But fear of stopping outweighed pain. If I slowed, the truth would freeze again beneath layers of silence. Harold visited once and found me half asleep at the desk. "You will collapse," he said quietly. "Then I will collapse standing," I replied. He sighed, looking at the stacks of evidence covering every surface. "You have already won more than most ever dare. You can rest now." "Not yet," I said. "Not until the whole machine falls." After he left, I felt something shift inside me, not doubt, but the ache of knowing he might be right. Every fight has a line where justice turns into obsession. I could feel my foot brushing against that line. The next morning, I tried something different. I walked through the city before sunrise, just to remember what life sounded like without sirens or arguments. The streets were empty except for the bakery opening its doors. The smell of warm bread carried through the cold air. For a moment, I felt ordinary again. Not a warrior, not a relic, just a person who had forgotten what peace felt like. But even peace could not hold for long. My phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "They are moving the investigation to federal court. They will come for you again, not as a defendant but as a witness. Be ready." I stared at the screen, feeling both relief and dread. The truth was no longer mine alone, it had become evidence for others. And evidence always demands sacrifice. That night, as rain tapped against the window, I realized the cost of truth was not measured in money or reputation. It was measured in years shaved off your life, in nights you never truly slept, in moments you could never reclaim. I sat with that thought until dawn broke again. The sky turned silver. My hands ached. My heart felt heavy but alive. I whispered into the quiet, "If this is the price, then let me pay it fully." Because once you choose truth, there is no way back to comfort. There is only forward, through the sleepless nights, through the pain, through the fear that time itself may run out before justice arrives. And even then, you keep walking. The letter from Sarah had felt like a lifeline. I had believed she was my anchor in a storm that refused to end. But anchors can rust in silence, and some do not hold when the current turns. It began with a rumor. A whisper in the hallway of the courthouse. Someone had leaked the sealed federal documents to a rival news outlet, details that only Sarah and Harold had access to. At first, I dismissed it. The press thrived on speculation. But when the story appeared the next morning, every line mirrored the confidential evidence I had handed to her alone. The betrayal hit me like a second trial. The article twisted my motives, painting me not as a fighter for justice but as a disgraced lawyer using a media spectacle to rebuild a broken reputation. The piece quoted unnamed sources claiming I had offered bribes for testimony. Lies. Perfectly shaped lies. By noon, my phone would not stop ringing. Reporters demanded statements. Former colleagues issued public apologies for ever supporting me. The district attorney delayed the next hearing, citing conflicts of interest. Harold arrived at my apartment that evening. His face carried the weight of disappointment mixed with pity. "You should not have trusted anyone with those files," he said quietly. "I trusted integrity," I replied. He looked away. "Integrity is expensive. Most cannot afford it anymore." The silence between us grew unbearable. Finally, I asked the question that had been burning since morning. "Was it you?" He looked insulted, then tired. "After everything we fought together, you still ask that?" "I have to," I said. "Because I have learned that betrayal always comes from the ones who say they never would." He left without another word. When the door closed, I realized how truly alone I was. That night, I sat at my desk and stared at the stacks of paper that had once meant hope. They now looked like ruins of something I had built too high. The city outside felt distant, the lights like small lies burning across the horizon. The stress finally caught my body. My vision blurred. My hands trembled. I reached for my medication but missed the glass, and it shattered on the floor. I sank to my knees, shards glinting like small verdicts. For the first time, I wondered if it was worth continuing. My mind drifted back to the first day of the trial, the laughter, the humiliation, the anger that had become my fuel. That fire now flickered low. My breath came shallow. I pressed my palms against the floor, whispering to no one, "Enough. I have given enough." The phone rang again. I ignored it. Then again. On the third ring, I answered without looking at the screen. It was Sarah. Her voice trembled. "They got to me," she said. "They threatened to release photos that could ruin my career. I did not sell you out for money. I was scared." I said nothing. Fear. That word again. It had been the reason behind every betrayal in this story. She continued, "I never meant to hurt you. But they wanted the files. They said they would destroy everything if I refused." "Who are they?" I asked. "I do not know," she whispered. "But they are not done with you." The line cut. I sat in silence for a long time. Betrayal no longer shocked me. It only numbed me. But this one was different. Sarah had not betrayed for greed or ambition. She had betrayed for survival. That realization hurt more than anger ever could. By morning, the news cycle had turned cruel again. Pundits debated whether my case was ever about justice or revenge. One commentator called me a cautionary tale about ego and age. I stopped reading after that. The next hearing loomed, but my will to fight was cracking. My health had worsened. The doctors warned me about stress, but the case had become the only thing holding me upright. Without it, I would fall completely. That evening, I stood by the window watching the rain streak down the glass. Each drop slid like a tear down the city's face. I thought of Emily sitting somewhere in custody, probably silent, probably broken. We had both been consumed by the same machine, one that rewarded silence and punished truth. A knock on the door pulled me back. When I opened it, Aaron stood there, soaked from the rain. His eyes looked haunted. "They came for me," he said. "Two men. They said if I testify again, I will disappear. I cannot do this anymore." "You cannot back out now," I said. "You are already part of this." "I am sorry," he whispered. "I am leaving the city tonight." He handed me a sealed envelope. "This is everything I have left. Use it if you still can." Then he turned and walked down the stairs without looking back. Inside the envelope were handwritten notes, dates, passwords, and one torn photograph of Victor Hale standing beside a man whose face I could not fully see. On the back, Aaron had written one line: "He is still alive." The world seemed to tilt. Victor Hale had been declared dead 15 years ago. His name was carved on a grave. But if this note was true, then every assumption I had made was wrong. I tried calling Harold to tell him. No answer. I tried again. Still nothing. I called his assistant. She said he had checked out of his office unexpectedly that morning. By midnight, the fear I had buried began to claw its way back. What if this had all been orchestrated, not just by Emily, not by the firm, but by Victor himself, a ghost directing the chaos from the shadows? Sleep would not come. I sat through the night, staring at the photograph until dawn painted the sky in dull gray. The idea of continuing felt unbearable. For the first time, I thought about walking away completely, letting the case collapse, letting the system swallow itself. Then my phone buzzed. A new message. No number. Only one line. "If you stop now, his name wins again." I did not know who sent it, but it pulled me back from the edge. I rose, washed my face, and looked in the mirror. The reflection that stared back was fragile, worn, and human. But behind the exhaustion, I saw something flicker, something that refused to die. The truth had cost me everything: friends, sleep, health, and faith. But surrendering now would cost me the last thing I had left: meaning. I whispered to my reflection, "You will finish this." And even as my hands shook and my eyes stung from sleeplessness, I began gathering the files again. One by one, I placed them in order. Each paper was a wound. Each wound, a reason to keep going. The fight was no longer about vindication. It was about survival of truth itself. And though every part of me wanted to collapse, I knew the breaking point was not the end. It was the moment before the rise. The courthouse air felt like static before a storm. The district attorney had rearranged the witness list without warning, and the defense table looked frayed at the edges. I knew I had one chance left to turn the current, and it would happen in seconds, not hours. Cross-examination is not a sword fight. It is a series of locks opening in the right order. They called Richard to the stand, the firm's financial director. Once confident, now gray at the temples and damp at the collar. He had always preferred numbers to people. Numbers do not judge. Numbers simply exist until someone forces them to speak. He swore in and kept his eyes on the wood rail, not on me. The district attorney began with gentle steps, then handed him to me. The judge nodded. I stood so slowly the room seemed to lean forward. "Mr. Lane," I said, "you managed the firm's high-security floor print devices, correct?" "Yes." "You controlled who could print from those devices?" "Yes." "You also supervised the retention of visitor logs for that floor?" "Yes." "You stated in your affidavit that I never accessed that floor during the month my alleged contract was printed." "That is correct." I let the silence stretch. The gallery held its breath. I lifted a thin folder. "I want to show you 3 items," I said. "First, the printer microdot table mapping device IDs to serial batch codes. Second, the firm's internal device assignment list. Third, the visitor log for a date 2 weeks after you first accused me." Opposing counsel rose. "Foundation." I held up the forensic report. "Chain of custody already admitted." The judge waved me on. "Mr. Lane," I continued, Please read the device ID embedded on the contract that carries my name. He squinted at the enlarged image on the screen. Device 3A. And who controlled device 3A? He swallowed. I did. And who printed from device 3A on the date marked by those dots? He licked his lips. The system shows a batch run, not a single user. So multiple copies were created? Yes. I stepped closer to the lectern. How many copies? He hesitated. 20. 20 copies of a contract with my name, printed on your device, after you had already accused me of forging it. He shifted. We were validating exhibits. By printing 20 copies from the secure floor. He did not answer. The judge stared over his glasses. I moved to the visitor log. You swore I never accessed that floor that month. Please read the fourth name on the day the 20 copies were printed. He glanced, then looked away. I cannot read that from here. Let me help you. I read it for him. Harold P. Wexler. A murmur rolled through the room. Harold was not at counsel table. He sat behind me, a few rows back, face expressionless. Mr. Lane, I said, why would a retired judge visit the secure floor the day you printed 20 copies of a contract that had already been entered into evidence against me? Opposing counsel objected. Speculation. Sustain. Time for the lock to turn. Mr. Lane, I said, did you meet with the district attorney in chambers at 8 this morning? He blinked. No, I lifted a sealed sheet. The judge had authorized its use if needed. Your Honor, may I approach the witness with his signed proffer summary? Opposing counsel lunged to his feet. Objection. Overruled, the judge said, voice flat. Bring it. I placed the sheet before Richard. Please confirm your signature. He stared at it as if it had been written by a stranger. It is mine. Please read the first sentence aloud. His voice was a threat. I admit that I coordinated the printing and movement of documents mislabeled as legacy clearances at the direction of senior partners. The gallery gasped. The sound was not loud. It was deep, like a room remembering how to breathe. Thank you, I said. Now read the second paragraph. He hesitated. The judge leaned forward. Read it. I admit that I informed the board that the contract bearing my name was a placeholder assembled from old sections to create pressure during negotiations. Opposing counsel shouted for a sidebar. The judge shook his head. Sit down. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. Mr. Lane, who gave that direction? He stared at the back wall. 2 board members. Name them. He said their names. Those names had appeared in whispers for months. Hearing them land on public record was like hearing a verdict. I kept my pace. Did you meet with another person the week those copies were printed? Yes. Is that person alive today? The room shrank. He looked at me, eyes suddenly wet. Yes. State the name. He closed his eyes. Victor Hale. A low thunder moved through the benches. Someone dropped a pen. The judge struck the gavel once, not to scold, but to anchor the room to time. Mr. Lane, I said, you signed an affidavit years ago that Victor was deceased. The death certificate was a misdirection. Who arranged it? The board. Why? To keep the structure intact. I nodded once. No further questions on that point. I turned, took 2 steps, then pivoted back. The countermove needed one final key. Your Honor, I said, based on the witness's sworn proffer and the testimony today, I move for application of the crime-fraud exception to pierce privilege over communications between the named board members, Mr. Lane, Ms. Emily, outside counsel, and any consultant operating under the Koval umbrella. I also request an in-camera review of all attorney-client materials that reference legacy clearance, variance, or escrow bypass. The witness has established a prima facie showing that legal services were used to further a fraud. Opposing counsel stood so quickly his chair skidded. This is an ambush. He is trying to raid privileged files under color of outrage. This is law, the judge said. He turned to me. Do you have authority? Yes. I cited 3 cases in steady cadence. Not a lecture. A sequence. The crime-fraud gate, the burden standard, the scope of review when counsel is used as a conduit. The judge had read them all. I could see it in his eyes. The motion is granted, he said. Immediate production to chambers. Any attempt to delete or alter will trigger contempt and referral. The room released a sound that was not applause and not panic. It was the rust of a broken lock falling away from a door that had waited for years. I faced Richard again. One more matter. On the day Harold visited the secure floor, did you provide him with any document? Yes. What document? A letter from Victor. Behind me, Harold shifted. I did not turn. Not yet. Did that letter discuss me? Yes. What did it say? It warned that you needed to be isolated and publicly discredited if you ever questioned the clearance channel. Why involve Harold? Because Victor believed you respected him. I let that land. Then I looked at Harold. Do you have that letter? He stood slowly, stepped to the aisle, and raised a plain envelope. His face showed years I had never seen on him. I do, he said. The judge called him forward. He handed the letter to the clerk with hands that did not shake. The clerk read silently, then passed it to the judge. The judge's jaw tightened by a fraction. He nodded to me. "Mark it," I said. "And publish." The screen filled with Victor's language. Cold. Efficient. No insult. Only instructions. Isolate. Confuse. Print 20. Exploit the escrow clause to trap later filings. Treat legacy clearance as holy. If challenged, remove originals. The audience read in silence. Reputations did not collapse with a crash. They sagged under the weight of their own design. The board members at the back row stood to leave and met a wall of deputies. I returned to Richard. "Mr. Lane, is there any doubt in your mind that the contract used to accuse me was constructed as a weapon, then backfilled through your devices to create false history?" "No doubt." "Is there any doubt that the people who created that weapon are the same people whose counsel now claims privilege to hide the forge?" "No doubt." No further questions. The judge looked at the clock and then at the jury. "We will take 15 minutes. I sat. My hands were steady in a way they had not been in months. The counter-move had not been showmanship. It was pressure in the right place, applied at the right time, with the right rule. During recess, Harold approached. For a long moment we did not speak. "I should have told you," he said at last. "You should have," I replied. "They blackmailed me with a mistake I made years ago. I thought time had buried it. It had not." I looked at him and felt the ache of old trust cracking without shattering. "Bring the rest," I said. "Everything he sent you. Everything you hid to protect me, and everything you hid to protect yourself." He nodded once and returned to his seat. When the court reconvened, the district attorney moved for immediate detention of the two named board members pending the crime-fraud review. The judge signed the orders without ceremony. Deputies moved. Faces drained. The gallery felt colder. As the bailiffs escorted them out, one board member turned toward me, eyes full of something that looked like disbelief wearing hatred as a mask. He mouthed a single word I could read easily. "Old." I rose, put my palms on the table, and met his gaze. Age had been the joke they told each other to feel safe. The room no longer found it funny. Outside, the corridor hummed with voices rushing to rewrite what they had just witnessed. I did not linger. I stepped into the light that spilled through the high windows and let it warm my face. The tide had turned not with rage, not with volume, but with a maneuver that asked the law to look at itself and refused to serve a lie. Verdict day began before dawn. I dressed in the half-light and sat on the edge of the bed with my palms pressed to my knees. My heart felt steady, not from peace, but from absence of anything left to fear. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled of old paper and polished stone. Reporters lined both walls. Their voices rose and fell like a tide that never reached me. Inside, the seats filled fast. Deputies stood along the back like quiet bookends. The district attorney reviewed notes without moving his lips. The judge entered, and the room lifted as one. A thin shaft of sun cut across the jury box. I could not tell if that was mercy or mockery. The clerk called the first witness. Richard returned to the stand. Sweat darkened his collar. Under oath, with the crime-fraud order hanging over him like a bell that had already been struck, he spoke in short, plain sentences. He admitted the batch prints. He admitted the ledger. He named the board members again, voice small, words sharp. He described a set of standing orders from a man the world had buried 15 years ago. Then came the name that had haunted every corridor, Victor Hale. The judge asked if the state intended to produce him. The district attorney nodded. The side door opened. A man walked in with a limp and a face rebuilt by time. Gasps moved through the room like wind through dry grass. He took the oath, looked at the seal above the bench, and did not blink. He said the death certificate had been arranged to shield a pipeline of deals. He said the goal was not money alone. The goal was control. Contracts that never stalled. Signatures that never faced questions. A system that treated delay as treason. He spoke about his apprentices without naming them until pressed. Then he named them. Emily, Richard, two board members, a fixer at a government office who now sat under indictment in another building. He did not look at me. Not once. I watched his hands. They lay flat, still, practiced. When my turn came to cross, the room leaned forward. I did not aim to humiliate him. I aimed to tie the last knot. "Mr. Hale," I said, "did you instruct your network to isolate me when I questioned the clearance channel?" "Yes." "Did you direct the use of my old signature as a mask?" "Yes." "Did you write the letter that warned my friend to help with that isolation?" "Yes." He did not fight any of it. He wore his deeds like a suit he had tailored himself. I asked one more question. "Why choose me?" "For the same reason you chose law," he said. "Predictable devotion." He did not smirk. He did not need to. The cruelty sat inside the words like a quiet hook. I thanked him and sat down. My hand stayed still on the table. I could feel the cut that those 6 words had made, and I let it bleed without flinching. Emily followed. She looked smaller than the last time. Not broken, but no longer made of metal. Under oath, she confirmed his design. She described the first lesson Victor taught her: never leave originals where sunlight can find them. She explained how forged history is built from ordinary tools: a copied clause, a backdated scan, a print run that becomes housekeeping in a log. She looked at me only once, when she said, "I told myself it was order." I held her gaze for one count and looked away. Forgiveness and rage stood side by side inside me, silent and unwilling to shake hands. Harold took the stand next. His voice carried the weight of tired years. He admitted the letter. He admitted fear. He admitted that he had chosen silence when courage would have cost him less than it cost me. He looked at me and tried to speak again. The judge told him to answer only what was asked. He nodded and did. The board members tried to save themselves with crafted denials. The crime-fraud ruling cut through their words like wire through soft clay. Emails appeared. Call logs appeared. A single calendar entry marked with a word they thought would never leave their circle: escrow bypass. The jury watched those screens with faces that did not betray a thought. That frightened me more than anger would have. Silence can kill when it chooses not to move. Later, a clerk wheeled in a small cart with a steel box. The neutral team had recovered fragments of shredded pages from a storage room behind the firm's secure floor. The reconstructed strips showed my name, the title of the contract, and the faint outline of the escrow clause they had planned to dodge. The judge studied the sheet and closed his eyes for a long breath. When he opened them, the room felt colder. Closing statements came and went like storms. Some words struck, some poured down the aisle and vanished under the benches. The judge gave instructions. The jury filed out. The door shut with the softest click I had ever heard. The sound reached a place in me that no gavel ever had. Waiting turned minutes into stones. I thought of my wife, of the way she used to place a hand on my shoulder when a case stretched too long. I thought of the cemetery dawn, the letter under my door that said I was not alone, the nights when sleep tasted like metal. My chest tightened. I breathed through it. If fate wanted drama, it would not get it from me today. The buzzer sounded. The jury returned. The foreperson held a stack of forms. The judge asked if a decision had been reached. Yes, the foreperson said, voice steady. On the claim of fraud by fabrication, liable. On the claim of malicious prosecution, liable. On the claim of conspiracy to obstruct, liable. On the claim against me, no liability. The words came one after another, each one falling into place like stones across a river I had been told I would never cross. Then came the punitive damages. The numbers were not small. Gasps rose again. Pens scratched. A deputy coughed and caught himself. I heard none of it clearly. Sound turned to a distant hum. I watched Emily lower her head. I watched Richard close his eyes. I watched the board members lose color. Victor sat without moving, as if the verdict had been carved on the wall before any of us were born. The judge thanked the jury and excused them with a gravity that sounded like prayer. He turned to the state. The district attorney requested remand for the 2 board members and for Richard pending sentencing on related counts. Emily's counsel asked for leniency tied to cooperation. The judge noted the request and set dates. He ordered the preservation of all materials, including the steel box. Then he looked at me. You may speak, he said. I stood. Words did not crowd my mouth. They arrived one at a time, measured. I came here to clear a name, I said. I leave here with something more complicated. I learned that truth does not come clean. It comes with scars. I will not pretend this brings me joy. It brings me quiet. That is enough. I sat down. My knees ached. My hands were steady. In that steadiness, I felt the cost in full. Years shaved, nights burned, friendships bent under weight they never asked to carry. This victory did not feel like a trumpet. It felt like a fire that had finally stopped climbing the walls. Court adjourned. The room released its breath and turned to noise. Reporters called my name. I walked past them without anger. The corridor glowed with afternoon light. I saw Harold by the pillar, his eyes wet. He tried to speak. I touched his shoulder once and kept moving. Words would not fix what time would need to mend. On the steps, Sarah waited with her pad closed and her head bare to the sun. She did not reach for a quote. She said only, I am sorry. I nodded. She had made a weak choice under strong pressure. That is a sentence that fits more souls than anyone admits. At the bottom of the steps, a young associate stood watching with a folder clutched to his chest. He could have been Aaron, or the person Aaron might still become. He asked if truth always hurts this much. I told him the hurt is the proof that it matters. I walked to the edge of the plaza and looked up at the windows where I had spent half a life arguing the shape of facts. I thought of the line Victor had given me, the one that tried to turn my devotion into a leash. Predictable devotion. He had counted on it. He had not counted on the slow power of time to turn devotion into endurance, and endurance into something harder than steel. A deputy approached with a sealed envelope from the clerk. Inside was a single page, the court's written finding on the contract that had once been lifted against my throat. It described the microdots, the fracture in my hand, the missing escrow, the reconstructed shreds. At the bottom, the judge had written a sentence that was not law but felt like it. Paper can lie, time does not. I folded the page and placed it in my pocket. My eyes stung, not from triumph, from a grief that had no opponent. The years taken will not return. The laughter from that first day will never be erased. The price is paid and cannot be refunded. On the walk home, the city sounded different. Not louder, not softer, just honest. Tires on wet pavement, a child laughing somewhere unseen, a bus braking, a kettle in a cafe letting off steam. Life without verdicts. I let myself in, set my keys on the table, and stood in the quiet. The files that once covered every surface were stacked neatly now, tagged and sealed for the archive. I brewed tea and watched the steam lift like a slow flag. I thought of what I would do with the money the jury had given me. I knew what would happen in the morning, but I did not say it aloud yet. Some choices deserve one night of pure silence before they are spoken. I carried the cup to the window and looked at the street. People moved in currents I could not chart. Somewhere, behind another set of doors, new deals were being drafted, new signatures planned, new ways to keep sunlight away from pages that need it. I did not kid myself. I had cut one chain. Others waited. Still, for this one day, the fire had done its work. The machine that tried to grind me down had ground its own makers instead. The victory sat in my chest like a warm coal. Pain lived there too, settled in beside it, unwilling to leave. They did not cancel each other. They taught me how to breathe. I signed the last document in a quiet office that smelled like old books and rain. The clerk slid the copy toward me. The amount was large enough to build a tower of steel. I chose paper and people instead. I walked from the courthouse to a small bank 3 blocks away. The city moved around me with its usual noise, unaware that I was about to empty a victory into something that might outlive me. The teller looked at the figures, then at my face, waiting for a sign that I understood what I was doing. I do, I said. Transfer it. The account on the receiving end belonged to a fund with a simple name. The Gray Scholarship. No glossy slogan. No carved mission statement. One line only. Tuition, books, and licensing support for professionals over 45 who were told they were past their time. Lawyers returning after caregiving. Nurses pushed out by shifting rules. Engineers written off the day their hair turned silver. I wanted the money to cut locks instead of throats. The first board meeting happened in a library room with flickering lights and scratched wood tables. The dean from a community law program sat beside a director from a nursing school. A counselor from a trade institute joined by video from a classroom where a drill hummed in the background. I told them what I wanted, and I told them what I did not want. No ceremonies, no plaques, no photos of me shaking hands beside a banner. Then what should we give it? The dean asked, besides the name. Teeth, I said. Pay for exams. Buy the tools. Cover bar prep and test fees. Clear old debts that block re-entry. Fund night classes so people can keep their daytime jobs. Tie every grant to one promise. Mentorship in both directions. The older teach the young teach the older. Everything else is noise. They agreed. The vote was quick. The papers moved. The fund opened. I did not attend the sentencings. I sent brief notes to the court instead. No flames. No speeches. I asked for accountability and time for the truth to be taught to anyone who would listen. Emily asked to see me once before she reported. I said yes. We met in a small room with a single window and a clock that clicked louder than the traffic outside. I have nothing useful to say, she began. You do, I answered. Tell the students you once mentored that a shortcut is not a path. Then tell them again when they smile and pretend they understood. She looked at the window and swallowed hard. I thought power meant speed. Speed without truth breaks the wheel, I said. You saw the wreckage. She nodded, and for a moment the mask fell and I saw the person who had arrived at the firm years ago with a notebook and a clean hope. I did not offer forgiveness. I offered something smaller and more durable. Teach the harm you helped build. That is the only ledger that makes sense now. Harold and I met on a bench outside the same courthouse where we had once traded strategies like cards. He carried a brown envelope filled with letters he no longer needed to hide. I handed him a folder from the fund, the first 3 recipients, their schedules, their mentors. He read the names and let out a breath that sounded like the end of a long winter. You always wanted a neat bow, he said. I wanted a clean door, I replied. Something people can walk through without fear of being told they are too late. He nodded and put the envelope away. We did not speak about the years between us that had bent under secrets. We let the afternoon stand between us like a witness who had already said enough. The first awards were small and quick. A pharmacist who had left work to raise 2 grandchildren took a licensing review course she could never afford. A mason with a bad back learned project estimating and moved from lifting stone to drawing plans. A paralegal who had spent 20 years documenting other people's arguments found the courage to sit for the bar. In every case, the same words appeared in the thank you notes. You made time listen. I kept my name off the letters. The only signature that mattered belonged to the future the notes carried. A month later, I stood in front of a night class on professional ethics. The students were a mix of lines and ages, a map of lives that had not followed the same road. I told them what I had learned when the floor dropped away. Age will not save you, I said. Neither will youth. What saves you is the habit of looking twice. What saves you is the refusal to move a paper you do not trust just because someone above you wants it moved. What saves you is the courage to keep a record when everyone else laughs at your old machine. And when you fall, because everyone falls, you stand with the truth even when it shakes. I did not mention the settlement. I did not mention the headlines. They did not need my old storm. They needed a barometer. Victor never appeared in my life again. Reports listed court dates and transcripts and the slow march of sentences and deals. I read none of it. The machine he built had been forced into daylight and broken in view of anyone who cared to watch. That was enough. The rest belonged to history books and damp archives. On a blue morning at the start of winter, I visited the cemetery with a small envelope in my coat. I stood by the stone that still carried a name I spoke aloud when no one was near. I laid the envelope on the grass. Inside was a photograph from the fund's first orientation circle. 10 faces. 10 different stories. The oldest had hands like carved wood. The youngest had eyes that held the same worry I once saw in a mirror. None of them looked like time had beaten them. They looked like time had put iron in their spine. I did not bring flowers, I said softly. I brought proof. Wind moved through the bare branches above me. It sounded like soft applause from a place that had no hands. The Bar Association invited me to speak at a ceremony that would have polished my shoes and drained my patience. I refused the stage and asked for a conversation with a smaller crowd in a plain room. I took the microcassette player with me and set it on the table without pressing play. I told them the old device had helped me see that progress without memory is just speed in circles. A person in the front row raised a hand. What would you tell someone who is 50 and starting over? Start twice, I said. Begin the work, and begin the record of the work. The world forgives errors. It does not forgive vanishing. The room went quiet in that good way a room goes quiet when people stop thinking about applause and start thinking about the lives waiting for them outside the door. I walked home under a sky that had the clean blue of a new page. The city sounded like itself again. Car tires on dry pavement. Shoes on stone. A bus door opening with a sigh. I passed a storefront where a woman, hair white as salt, coached a child through long division with patience that never raised its voice. The sight felt like a blessing without a name. That night, I brewed tea and opened a stack of envelopes that had arrived without return addresses. Most came from hands I would never shake. One came from a man who had been fired at 53 for being slow with systems. He now taught those same systems to apprentices who were half his age. He wrote one line that I copied and taped to my wall: "Wisdom ages, but never rusts." I slept deeply for the first time in months. In the morning, I wrote a short note to the funds board: expand the program to include small emergency grants for older workers who need 1 month of rent to survive a transition. Poverty kills more careers than any exam. I sealed the envelope, placed it by the door, and watched the sun climb the wall. My hands were steady. My breath was even. The laughter that had once followed me out of a courtroom had been replaced by a quieter sound that mattered more. The hum of work beginning. The scrape of chairs in classrooms at dusk. Pens on paper. Lives picking up tools. You asked me what I did with the victory. I refused revenge. I chose repairs. I chose a door with a hinge strong enough to swing for others after I am gone. There will always be new schemes and fast talkers and rooms where windows do not open. That is not new. What is new is a fund with teeth and a line of people who will not be told that time has closed on them. If you stayed with me through this fire, take one thought with you when the screen goes dark. Speak it to anyone who rolls their eyes at patience, or laughs at quiet hands that still know how to hold a pen steady when the room shakes. Never underestimate the quiet ones. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs it. There is another story waiting on the channel. Bring them with you.